Hello, everyone. I'm Tony Jenkins. I am the Managing Director of the International Institute on Peace Education and the coordinator of the Global Campaign for Peace Education. And I'm really pleased to invite you here today to listen to a special dialogue amongst some friends, feminist peace scholars and activists, Betty Reardon, Kozue Akibayashi, Asha Hans, and Mavic Cabrera Balleza. And this dialogue today is an observation of the convergence of several anniversaries related to women's actions for peace and empowerment. Of particular significance is the 20th anniversary of the UN Security Council Resolution 1325 on women, peace, and security. And I would add to that too, the 25th anniversary of the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action that was adopted at the Fourth World Conference on Women. And we also recognize today the 35th anniversary of the first publication of Betty Reardon's seminal book, Sexism and the War System. And this is particularly relevant for a few reasons. 2020 also marks the 70th anniversary of the start of the Korean War. And coming out later this month, for the first time, will be a Korean translation of Sexism and the War System. So we have the opportunity to celebrate that translation. So before we jump into this discussion, this conversation today, I just want to quickly introduce to everyone our four discussants. In random order, we have Asha Hans, is a former professor of political science and gender studies at Uttal University in India. And she is also the co-founder of the Shanta Memorial Rehabilitation Center, which is a leading volunteer organization in India working on issues of gender and disability at both national and international levels. And she is also the co-author and editor of two relevant recent books. One is Openings for Peace, UN Security Council Resolution 1325, Women and Security in India. And the second is the gender imperative, human security versus state security, which she co-authored and co-edited with Betty Reardon. We also have with us today, Kozue Akibayashi, who is a feminist peace researcher, educator, and activist from Japan, where she is currently a professor at the Graduate School of Global Studies in Doshisha University in Kyoto. Her research focuses on issues of sexual violence by the military, particularly in overseas host communities, where she's done a lot of activism, in particular in Okinawa, around US military bases. Her work also addresses militarization and demilitarization and decolonization. She was recently the international president of the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom between 2015 and 2018. She serves on the steering committee of Women Cross DMZ and is also the country coordinator for Japan in the International Women's Network Against Militarism. And joining us also is Mavic Cabrera Balleza. She is the founder and CEO of the Global Network of Women Peace Builders. And Mavic's experience has been tremendous. She initiated the Philippines National Action Plan process on Security Council Resolution 1325, and also has served as the international consultant to Nepal's National Action Plan. In addition, she's provided technical assistance and support on 1325 National Action Planning in Guatemala, Japan, and South Sudan. And she and her colleagues have pioneered the localization of UNSCR 1325 and 1820 program that is regarded as one of the best practice examples and is now being implemented in over 15 countries. And finally, and last but not least, is our good friend Betty Reardon. She is the founding director emeritus of the International Institute on Peace Education. She is recognized worldwide as a pioneer on issues of gender and peace education. And as already mentioned, she is the author of Sexism and the War System and co-editor author with Asha Hans of The Gender Imperative. So welcome.
Thank you.
I'm going to turn the question first to Betty as sort of our journalist to help us kind of conceptualize some of the key ideas and issues here today. And then I'm going to turn the questions to our colleagues to provide a little bit more context on the issues being explored in their particular, with the particular constituents that they work with. So Betty, can you start us off by talking about the various anniversaries that I've mentioned, 1325, Sexism, Beijing Platform, and there's numerous others as well we can mention. What particular meaning and relevance do these anniversaries have today for the constituencies that you work with, which is pretty broad, for peace through women's empowerment?
Well, in terms of thinking about this conversation, I identified my constituencies as women, peace educators, and peace researchers. And I designate women because particularly in the field of peace research, there has always been a huge gender gap. This is, as Tony mentioned, the 35th anniversary of sexism in the war system. But sexism in the war system had its roots in the initial struggle of women peace educators within the International Peace Research Association to get them to address the possibility. We did not insist that this was a fact. We all had our intuitions, we all had background research, but what we call the symbiosis between sexism and militarism was something that affected both feminist research and peace research. And we struggled to have that recognized. A similar thing was happening in the United Nations. The year that it began was 1975, the International Women's Year, the year of the Mexico Conference. And in preparing for the Mexico Conference, we had an opening to at least get the male peace researchers to attend to something that was on the international agenda. But the reaction to the peace issue and the women's issue was that it was peripheral, and it was distracting from the important issues of disarmament, which some feminists were calling at the time arms counting. So I'll just end this with what we did manage to do was to set up a Women in Peace Commission in IPRA, so that made up mainly of peace educators, so that we could continue the struggle, and it continues to some degree to this day. And with the sponsorship of the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, we got one panel on peace at the Mexico Conference, and that was on disarmament, wherein the feminists there all committed to the significance of general and complete disarmament to the overall feminist peace vision.
Thank you, Betty. I want to turn to Mavic and invite you to kind of build upon the question that I asked to Betty. Can you please speak briefly of the women's peace constituencies that you work with, and I know there are many, and which of these various anniversaries and others maybe we haven't mentioned might have particular meanings to them in their respective struggles for peace through women's empowerment?
Thank you, Tony, for organizing this important conversation and for inviting me. My organization, the Global Network of Women Peace Builders, main constituencies are women and youth peace builders. And the anniversaries that have a special significance to them are the 20th anniversary of the groundbreaking UN Security Council Resolution 1325 on women, peace, and security, which is taking place this October, and the 25th anniversary of the Beijing Platform for Action, the most comprehensive global women's empowerment agenda that was endorsed by 189 countries 25 years ago. Why so? Why local women and youth peace builders? First, I would like to say that the Women, Peace and Security agenda has been one of the most rapidly growing policy area. And these are very important because the Resolution 1325 broadened the discourse on women's participation in peace and security discussions and decision making. And it has also emphasized the fact that how war affects women and girls is not just a women's issue. It's not just it's not just a concern of women or young women, but a global phenomenon that impacts on how the international security responds to violent conflicts. And there are right now 9 supporting resolutions to 1325, but the discussions and the continued policy making, global and regional and national, often do not include young women and women peace builders in local communities affected by conflict. These are the people who live the conflict every single day of their lives, and yet they're not part of the discussions. They're not part of the decision making. National action plans often, member states often take what we refer to as tick the box approach. So there's a list of UN obligations that they have, and they tick the box and forget about implementing them. And many of them gather dust on the shelves of government bureaucracies. And why? That is because they are, a majority of the people, especially local populations, do not know about them. They are not able to participate in implementing them. They're not able to use them as instruments for accountability. Now, Beijing Plus 25 is also critically important. It's a critically important anniversary because it commemorates this most comprehensive women's empowerment agenda. And one of the critical areas of concern of the Beijing platform is women and armed conflict. So this was one of the foundation international instruments of Resolution 1325. And interestingly, the organizing of the 25th anniversary, which is referred to as Generation Equality Forum, completely left out women, peace, and security, as if gender equality could be achieved without peace. So we fought hard, and we lobbied, we spoke with, we demanded meetings with the UN Women Executive Director, with the Secretary General, and I'm very happy to share with all of you that we have one major achievement, that the core group, which is France, Mexico, and UN Women, listened to our demand to intentionally integrate women, peace, and security in Beijing Plus 25. Now there is a compact on women, peace, and security and humanitarian action. But we need to see that it really serves its purpose.
Thank you, Mavic. I want to turn now to Asha, and I'm going to ask you again the same question. If you can please unmute yourself and you get a chance there, Asha. So again, can you please briefly speak about the women's peace constituencies that you work with, and which of these anniversaries have particular relevance to them?
I think it's not easy. Thank you, Tony, for this and for inviting me to speak today. It's not easy to be in India and to speak about peace. For many, many years, we have been trying to get off the ground, but it's been a very, very difficult process. So whatever the moment comes, we seize it. It's not that because I'm an academic, I'm a researcher, I write. I do that, but I also do, for example, the last thing that I did was at the World Hockey Cup, where I spoke with children and saw to it that they, that where India, Pakistan players were coming in, that they would talk to them and bring them together. So in these kind of countries, this is the kind of situation that we are faced with. And but in this year, for instance, where Beijing plus 25 and 1325 is concerned, I think if you look at it from the constituencies that I work with, there are different levels. At the academic level, 1325 is important. But at the activist level, which I do a lot of work as the chairperson of the Pakistan-India People's Forum for Peace and Democracy, it is, peace is there, but 1325 is not mentioned because the governments of both the countries of India and Pakistan do not consider 1325 as an important they don't give it the importance that they would give, for instance, to Beijing, because that is a government process. And Beijing 25 is across the whole of India, and there are consultations held with everyone. And in that, though there is a section on conflict, women and conflict, the government of India, for instance, says that they do not answer that even in their reviews because there is no conflict in India. In the same way, the same thing happens in Pakistan, and over the last few years, all over South Asia, 1325 has not been very important, except in Bangladesh, it has come up as an important issue, which it was not earlier. So basically, what we are trying to do is to get 1325 on the ground, or if it cannot be done, we don't have a national action plan, then can we do something else where these are concerned? UN, the charter is nowhere in sight. It is not talked about, it is not discussed. But militarism also is a difficult process to discuss, except in academia. And in the process of activism, it's very, very low, only a few organizations. I think that is how we stand today.
Thank you, Asha. I think these concerns of the challenges of implementing 1325 are something we're going to want to take up in depth here a little bit later on in the conversation. So I want to turn to our final discussant, Kozue. Again, same question to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Tony, for organizing this. And I'm so honored to be part of this conversation with my mentors and dear colleagues. This year, 2020, is a very important year for I don't know if I can call that my constituency, but feminist peace activists with whom I have been working for many years. The first one, a network or organization, loose network or loosely organized women feminist peace activists in Okinawa. Okinawa Women Act Against Military Violence is celebrating their 25th anniversary this year. They organized. They started to be more visible by standing up when they learned about this particular sexual violence case in Okinawa in 1995, and that was shortly after they had participated in the NGO forum in Beijing, or FIRO, to be precise, to be more precise, where about 70 of 71, in fact, Okinawan women formed a delegation to participate in NGO forum, and one of the presentations and workshops they did was on the military and structural violence of the military and sexual violence that they have suffered for many decades. um, by US soldiers since 1945, but even before that, by the Japanese Imperial Army during the World War II. In fact, 2 days ago, June 23rd, is the memorial day of the Battle of Okinawa in 1945, where US military and the Japanese Imperial Army waged direct combat on their island and without evacuating civilians. So the Okinawans, the people of Okinawa, which is a part of Japan, who was annexed to the modern state of Japan in the late 19th century, was sacrificed to save time strategically for the majority of the population in Japan. This is also their anniversary, 75th anniversary of the end of the World War II, but also for them a very, very difficult time towards the very end of the World War II. And Northeast Asia has not, I don't think it has not overcome that war and the succeeding Cold War. And Betty Sexism in the War System which was published, the first publication was 35 years ago, is still very, very relevant in this region, particularly on the Korean Peninsula. Today, June 25th, is the 70th anniversary of the beginning of the Korean War, and the involvement of my activism with the Okinawan women also led to my participation in feminist peace efforts to end Korean War. So those are the many anniversaries that I want to introduce today. Thank you.
Thank you, Kozue. So I want to provide a space, kind of briefly open this up here so we can have a bit more of a conversation. So if you have any questions you'd like to ask of our colleagues here, or if you'd like to clarify or extend your thoughts a little bit or comment on what others have said, I want to open it up for that.
Yeah, oh, go ahead, Mavic.
Oh no, go ahead, Betty.
Okay.
I'll follow after you.
I just wanted to do two things. Extend the comment I made on the militarism, sexism symbiosis, that the two phenomenon are mutually reinforced. They are integrated one to the other. They are not separate, and they are mutually reinforcing. And essentially, they are mechanisms to maintain patriarchy. So that's something that I think is important from my perspective on when we talk about the structures that we're dealing with. The other thing I wanted to respond to was the difficulty of raising military issues, having anything that challenges military security, because it is viewed as anti-state, as unpatriotic, as endangering the state. So I think that is very, I just wanted to clarify that, and then I'll turn off my telephone.
Thank you, Betty. While Betty's sitting off her telephone, maybe I'll turn it to you, Mavic.
Yeah, I have a question and some comments on Asha's point about Pakistan and India not having national action plans. I recognize that there's still a number of member states that do not have appetite to develop and adopt national action plans for a number of reasons. One of them you know, the denial that they have conflicts. And which also brings me to a related point about what's the definition of conflict. If you look at the countries on the agenda of the Security Council, countries that they consider or have conflict, that are a threat to international peace and security, that's only about 32, 33 countries at any given time. But we know there are much more, you know, conflicts happening elsewhere that are, you know, also threats to international peace and security. And many of them are cross-border conflicts. So that's one of the reasons why some member states don't want to adopt national action plans. But we also, you know, have countries that don't have national action plans, but many other things are happening. Many other initiatives are taking place that are able to hold member states accountable. A good example is Colombia, which, as we know, has one of the biggest and longest running conflict. They have signed a peace agreement with the FARC, but that barely made a difference in terms of actually, you know, stopping the guns from being fired. And we, as I said, our main constituencies are local women and youth peace builders. So working with those local and women and youth peace builders and local authorities like governors, mayors, district councilors, indigenous leaders, we were able to draft and adopt 18 local action plans in Colombia. And the national government is taking notice of that, because it's also in a way shaming them. They look like they're not, like they you know, the fact that they're being left behind by the local authorities, by the local populations in terms of using these instruments to effectively respond to the conflict and all of its, you know, many impacts, is making, the national government look bad, and it's creating pressure for them to adopt a national action plan. They haven't done yet, but there's a lot of news that they're that the national government is now seriously considering that. So this is one of the modalities of our localization strategy on the women, peace, and security resolutions. Over to you, Tony.
Thank you, Mavic. I'm going to move on to the next question, but I really appreciate that you brought our attention to the strategic relevance of these local action plans. And so we're going to come back to that in a little bit here. So Betty, I want to direct this next question first to you, as I did before. So you and Asha put forth a really well reasoned feminist human security framework and the gender imperative. And that framework includes 4 dimensions. It includes the environment, basic needs, human dignity, and personal safety and community security. So Betty, can you help us to elaborate and conceptualize this feminist human security framework a little bit, and also illuminate how militarized state security, as you were just pointing out, undermines this framework?
Okay, well, first, let me remark on the term feminist. Within the perspective that this framework was outlined, feminist meant 2 things. It meant the fundamental assumption of equality between men and women, and it also indicated a women's perspective. Because of the gender separation, women's perspective on many of the issues that comprehend security were somewhat distinct. The other aspect that made it distinct from the common national security paradigm was that it emphasized security of the people rather than the primacy of the security of the state. And the argument went that in securing the state, the security of the people was largely undermined. And that was most evident when it was seen from the everyday lives of women on the ground, from the constituencies that Mavic was referring to, the type of constituencies that Mavic was referring to in telling us about the local plans of action in Colombia. Further, women's spheres of community and social action gave us insights into women's security priorities. And it seems that they were defining security as human well-being. What is good for my family? What is good for my community? What do I need to assure, or what do we in community need to assure to see that our lives are lives of well-being? And with that, we looked at where were their social actions? What were the realms that women as women were addressing through their organizations and community groups? And one of the primary ones, and the women were the first leaders in the environmental movement, was they realized that the health of their community and their families was being affected from this is decades ago, being affected by environmental deterioration. So we know where we are today on that. Further, in most communities, there was not a just distribution of resources. And in many cases, children did not have adequate nutrition, families were not getting health care, children had inadequate schools, so basic needs were not being met. Then it was also the beginning of another, I would say, another realm of the human civil rights movement. And that is the phase of second stage feminism in which the human rights argument was being made for women's rights, but that was coming out of a concept of human rights as universal. So, and looking at the way in which the denial of human dignity ultimately could lead and did lead to deadly conflicts. And finally, people needed to be assured that they'd be protected from unpredictable or unavoidable harm, such as we've experienced in Maria in Puerto Rico, that we're experiencing now with COVID. And state security did not provide that kind of human security. In fact, if you look at it, the environment is ultimately destroyed by all forms of military action, from testing to preparing, training for battle, etc. We know that basic needs are put on the back burner as military budgets are increased. We know that people are dehumanized to propel and forward conflicts that are seen in the interest of the state. And we know that the state continues to arm itself to the teeth to maintain its power. And so we see that largely, and I would say to maintain patriarchy, but we can put that aside, so that what we need to look at is a shift from state to security to human security, and to understand that these two types of security are antithetical one to the other, that we have to redefine national security in terms of the security of the people of the nation, and the state should be an instrument of that security, not the object of security policy. So I think that's the major shift we have to make. And I was delighted in yesterday's parliamentarians discussion to hear a lot of the things that we have been discussing about the integral nature of women's participation to peace, talking about human security, talking about comprehensive disarmament and so forth. But there still was this lack of specifying that we cannot continue to be state dependent and weapons dependent for security, because it undermines all aspects of human security.
Thank you, Betty, for that tremendously clear conceptualization of the framework and for the transitions that need to take place from moving from state to human security. So I want to turn it again, we'll go in the same order we did previously. I'll first turn it to Mavic. How have these dimensions of the feminist human security framework, or as Betty just described them, the priorities that are kind of rooted in women's everyday experience of the environment, basic needs, human dignity, personal safety, and community security, how have these been affected by militarized nation state security and armed conflict in the regions and with the women that you work with?
Yeah, they have been tremendously affected, if not completely disregarded. And it's nowhere, it's clearer than in national budgets. As you know, again, I go back to the example of national action plans. Most national action plans, so there are about 83 now, and only 18, 1/8 of those national action plans on Resolution 1325 on women, peace, and security, only 18 out of the 83 have dedicated budget. And most of that budget is even dependent on official development aid, not from, you know, the actual national budget, government budget. So as soon as that official development aid is, you know, used up, then, you know, so the implementation discontinues. And we've, you know, we've validated this time and time again in many countries that we work in advocating and providing support for development of national and local action plans. We asked this government, what happened to the national action plan? Why has the implementation been discontinued? Oh, because there's no more, you know, budget from our, you know, this and that country. But then you would see that they continue to recruit military personnel, and especially, you know, it's also very glaring during this pandemic that the responses to the COVID-19 crisis are very securitized. And you know, the police and military are being mobilized. So I'm speaking, for example, in, you know, in the context of my home country, the Philippines, in the cities and municipalities most affected by the COVID-19 crisis, there are tanks on the street instead of distributing more protective equipment to hospitals, instead of raising the salaries of doctors and nurses who are working overtime. They're mobilizing more police and military, and a lot of times increasing surveillance and harassing local women and youth peace builders, which, by the way, have become the frontliners in the COVID-19 crisis. They are the first ones to go to IDP and refugee camps, distributing information in local languages on how to prevent the spread of the virus, distributing face masks, distributing hygiene kits to women and girls in the settlement. So it tremendously affected our advocacy for feminist human security. And that is, you know, all the more glaring today in the times of this pandemic.
Thank you for bringing in that really important COVID connection and that linkage between the coronavirus and the sort of failures of nation state security and keeping us secure. So same question over to you, Asha.
What I was trying to say is that what Betty had said, we took that as a framework, but I look at South Asia and what is happening now in response also to what Mavic has said. In certain areas, it is not easy to work on 1325. So there is a lot of resentment among a lot of people. And for instance, you have seen what has happened with a large number of people, of migrants who came, thousands of them on the street. There is food insecurity. When you have these kind of issues in front of you, then to talk of peace and 1325 becomes difficult. There is a time to do everything, and at the moment the time is to look at what is happening. That we have a huge border, about 15,000 kilometers in the north of India. At the moment, there is a big war with China. There is skirmishes with Pakistan. There's a catastrophic problem with Nepal. So 3 issues while COVID is on. I won't go into who is to blame and who is not. But the thing is that what is happening is that there is a militarized structure in place. There is militarism. And it is that we have to look into and see how can we do away with it. And there are methods of doing it and ways of doing it. Sometimes the system that we have, which has a system of inequality. When you have a war system like India and Pakistan and China have 3 states together, then the inequality, the Oxfam report which came last year said that 1% of India's population holds 70% of the wealth of the country. Then this kind of inequality that is there, and when you talk about inequality that 70% they hold the wealth, I'm sure there are no women. And where women are concerned in terms of livelihood, in terms of inequality, they are lowest on the ladder. Many of the reports that have come out till now has shown that. There's a persistent masculinity and a talk of violence. Even if you look at COVID, the kinds of language that is being spoken, war against COVID, the battles on the ground, there is a language that is there of a war system which creates a violence within the country. So you have a lot of policemen using a lot of violence against people on the ground. So it might not be there on the borders, but it does exist within the society. And that is something I think we need to look at, that the war system is not always of armaments. There is also a war system within the society. We are a nuclear power. We have, I think we are the 2nd highest armaments purchasers in the world. And so, you know, this is something that we need to look at. So basic needs, what Betty said, are very, very, these 4 things that she mentioned are very, extremely important to do away with militarization.
Thank you very much, Asha, for framing the war system for us and the intersections between militarism, masculinity, and you didn't use the word, but we can throw in there patriarchy. So now I turn the same question over to you, Kozue.
Sure, thank you. Maybe I would like to reframe that question a little bit. Not asking the so-called local constituency about, you know, what are the which part of the 4 dimension is most affecting them, because having worked with Betty for many years on this conceptualization, these actually came from their experiences. We who may not be, who are less affected, have the privilege of thinking about this, working on this in academic institution, for example. We worked on that to conceptualize, but these came from the ground, and we put them together probably 20 years ago. And there was a particular time when women from different areas, including Okinawa, and my colleague Suzuo Takazato was also a part of this women's group, feminist scholars and activists who tried to present what their experiences have been for many years, and that's how we were able to come up with this framework or alternative to change the paradigm of security from militarized one to human-centered or humane one or human security. So, and Okinawan women, having lived with active foreign military for many years, and so their experiences with the military, again, foreign military and active foreign military in a colonized situation, they came up, or they were able to tell us how militarized security have undermined undermined their lives, livelihood, and even survival, and disrespect their identity or culture or dignity, and their basic needs, how their basic needs have been ignored by the very, very presence of the military, who have been there for the security of whom is our question, fundamental question, to challenge the militarized security system. And these women did it from a feminist perspective, that women's perspective, like as Betty put, like women, and they included Okinawan women, also included children who were made vulnerable, we argue, in a masculine or patriarchal society. Women and children were considered in a patriarchal system not good enough, not smart enough, or cannot be independent because you don't have power, is what the patriarchal system, patriarchy, have always told them. And we wanted to turn that away, turn that around. That's a very narrow understanding, or a very disrespectful understanding of one's ability or existence, and that is a fundamental challenge of feminist peace activists from the host community of this particular foreign military, U.S. military. and so it's not the kind of, it's not the question is, so what affect them, what dimension affects them most is not a very, I wouldn't think it's not a very, it's not the kind of question that could tell us what their their own conceptualization or understanding or even challenge to present militarized security system and patriarchy.
Thank you, Kozue, for that very, very important reframe. So again, I want to open it up here just for a brief minute or two for reflections, comments, extensions, or replies to what anyone has said. Betty?
I'd like to refer to Asha's comments on police violence and its increase during COVID. I think that is a very important element to understanding the nature of the war system as pervasive of all levels of human society. Because we also know that during COVID, domestic violence increased. So in times of stress, physical violence always becomes more severe. And the other aspect of the police violence is that it happens in so many societies because the police are another instrument through which the state maintains its own security. It is the way it maintains its security against its own people. In some cases, they actually use the military against their own people, as happened in front of the White House recently, the National Guard clearing peaceful protesters. But another thing to remember about police and police violence is that their primary mission has become not the protection of people, as would be appropriate to a human security paradigm, but law and order, which is a code word for property. So the main function of the police has become protecting property, not people. And innumerable people's rights have been trampled because of this. So that the police issue is an important demilitarization issue as well.
Mavic.
Yeah, I just would like to add more on, how COVID-19 has impacted our advocacy for feminist human security. I think despite the devastating impact of the COVID-19 crisis globally, there are now around 485,000 deaths globally because of COVID. It also presents an opportunity for us to even more emphasize the absolute necessity of a human security framework. And as I said earlier, I gave the example of women and youth peace builders who have become the first responders. They are first responders in many crises, not just COVID, but it's been highlighted more that while governments are still politicking or don't know what to do to respond to the crisis, the women and youth, local women and youth peace builders are already there doing what needs to be done. And in many cases, in the eyes of the local communities, it made it much more concrete what the local women and youth peace builders are fighting for. So I had a conversation with the Bangsamoro regional autonomous government representatives. The Bangsamoro Autonomous Regional Government is actually the result of the negotiation between the Philippine government and the Moro Islamic Liberation Front. It's the implementation of the peace agreement to allow for the establishment of this regional autonomous government. So they were in the process of they have established the Bangsamoro Regional Authority. They were in the process of developing the different commissions, including the Bangsamoro Women's Commission, the Youth Commission, the Youth Human Rights Commission, and then they are already in the process of working on the administrative code and the very important electoral code. And COVID-19 happened. All of that had to stop. They had to shift gears. They had to do emergency response. So when I had a conversation with them and I said, how is that derailed all of your important plans? And they said, yes, we're very sad about it, but we also appreciate the opportunity to bring peace closer to the people, or to bring the peace agreement closer to the people, because they were being told, oh, now we know what the Bangsamoro autonomous government is, what it is there for. And same thing with the civil society activists, the women and local women and youth peace builders. So these are the same people that are fighting for peace, that have been telling us it's important to participate in the peace negotiations and implementation of the peace agreement. And this is related to what we need. This is related to life and death. It's that important and it's that concrete, and that it relates to social protection, access to health services, etc. So it became very concrete, and we need to take this moment to really establish how important feminist human security is and how we can all work together to achieve it.
Thank you, Mavic. Asha, Kozue?
Yeah, I think what Mavic said is very important, because at times of when we have times like this, when we have so many issues, I think we need to do that. And what we are seeing here also in India is seeing very young girls going out on the streets and doing just that, trying to create small locations, spaces of peace. They're trying to create small spaces where people can go out and you can walk around, or at least do whatever has to be done in terms.
Thank you, Asha. Kozue?
I would like to follow up a little bit on COVID and the COVID-19 and the military activities that in the other conversation that I had with the feminist peace activists in host communities of U.S. military bases in Okinawa, or in Guam, Hawaii, the Philippines, or in Australia, and those in those areas, military poses, the U.S. military actually poses another threat of COVID-19, because they rotate, and the military is not the subject of local quarantine policies or other the public health policies. So they are the COVID also shows how the military is excluded from well, at least local policies, but still it's and it's still treated as something like sacred, or you don't touch touch them because they provide security or whatever the reason is. It actually poses real threat to fragile communities where medical infrastructures are poorer, because of their island state, the situation, or for other economically more struggling status. They already are vulnerable to such pandemic. Yet the military, unquarantined military, may be bringing in the COVID, and nobody's and the U.S. military, the United States is not taking responsible for that either. That has that shows another dimension of or the vulnerability of the militarized security. Something I wanted to also share with share here.
Thank you, Kozue. I think most of us maybe hadn't been thinking about that, and it's a really important connection for us to make. I'm sensitive to time, and I know we have about 20 minutes left, and I really want to get to our last question and hopefully have a little bit of time for wrap up. So I want to turn it back again to Betty, and again, in the gender imperative, you and Asha put forth, and I'll quote you here, that the best hope for bringing the provisions of 1325 into full realization also lie with global civil society, in particular local peace and women's human rights activists throughout the world. And in particular, you and Asha call for the development of people's action plans, something we've heard that Mavic has been engaged in and working on. So what are you envisioning here, and how can that be transformative?
Well, I think it's quite clear from the report that Mavic gave that the implementation of the full intentions of 1325 can only come into being if it comes from the ground, if it comes from the people themselves, who will be defining the areas of violence to which that instrument could be applied, and from that work on the particular strategies for their communities. And we also see that if we do that plan within a human security framework, that it will be comprehensive, holistic, and integrated. Because one of the aspects of that framework is that no single dimension of human security can be fulfilled without regard to the others. They are totally interdependent, one with the other. And the standard strategy of parallelism, we do this at the same time as we do that, without seeing how they interrelate and affect each other, can be very obstructive to the objectives of the human security paradigm, which is a higher standard of well-being for all the people that come within the community, the realm of any given community. When I thought in terms of people's plans of action for those first constituencies, which I thought of as people we work with, toward whom are we trying to make an overture to conversation, an overture to come, let us think together about this problem, let us learn together. And it relates very much to what Kozue said about the origins of the framework, that it came from experience. So for the constituencies of peace educators and peace researchers, the people in the universities and schools in particular, the exercise of making a plan, choosing a community that they're concerned with. It could be theirs, it could be one that they're studying in some other realm, and working through the whole process of defining the nature and types of violence that exist in this community, how those elements of violence are undermining human security, and beginning to speculate together on what are ways that we can increase the enjoyment of human well-being in this area while decreasing the constant threat of weaponry and military violence, so that I see this as an exercise in reality, awakening to reality, to the theoretical classes who have, for all my years of experience, they have not been reticent to comment and interpret on all kinds of things, whether they have experience with it or not. So as close as we can get academia to reality, I think that we will make great steps toward human security.
Thank you, Betty. So I think you've framed this in a way that requires me to kind of reframe the question for everyone else. And I think you bring importance to the question of how we go about doing it. And so how is it in your work, and this question for all of you, and we'll start with Mavic first, that you might go about devising and implementing people's action plans? And Mavic, obviously you've been doing this very specifically through your localization efforts. So what does that look like in practice? How do we go about doing that?
We literally lay down Resolution 1325 and women, peace, and the supporting women, peace, and security resolutions on the table. We have infographics, we have PowerPoint, and we also lay down on the table or on the screen what already exists. And from our research, especially after the Beijing conference, there are now an average of 4 to 5 national policies on gender. National gender policy, national women and children framework. They come in, country-specific strategy on sexual violence and conflict. They come in different names, but there's no shortage of policies on gender equality and women's rights. And as I said, there are 83 national action plans, but there's so much disconnect. And when we come to, let's say a municipality in Colombia or in the Democratic Republic of Congo, talking about the National Action Plan or Resolution 1325, oh, isn't it the same as the National Gender Policy or the country-specific strategy on sexual violence? Because there's no effort by the national authorities, especially, to bring all of this together, to harmonize them. So what we do is to harmonize them. The last thing that we want to do is reinvent the wheel and add more work to this already overworked local authorities. What we want to do is to change how policymaking and policy implementation happens, which is usually top to bottom. National action plan happens in Kinshasa, not involving anyone from North and South Kivu, not involving anyone from Cauca or Valle de Cauca when you talk of Colombia, when they do the gender policy. And when those are adopted, they give them pieces of paper or now email. They send them the link to the document. Here is the policy, it's been adopted. It's your responsibility to implement them. They know nothing about what's in there. They don't have a contribution. They don't feel, invested into it. So that's what we're changing, the policy making and policy implementation culture. People will not subscribe to, will not contribute to anything that they don't know. Now, and then we've also, because we've recognized the major issue about funding, and I love quoting the former Minister for Peace and Reconstruction in Nepal, who said, a national action plan without budget is like a car without fuel. And so we developed a methodology on costing and budgeting based using gender responsive budgeting principles on how to identify different pockets in government where they can get money. And you know, as always, the pie, when you put the national budget into a pie, the biggest slice of the pie goes to the defense and military. And what we want to do is cut that huge slice of the pie and move that to women, peace and security, national action plan, local action plans. And Asha, I totally recognize people's action plans, but we want to bring the government authorities, national, local, in the process so that they own it. Otherwise, what we've observed is they just, oh, it's just civil society action plans. We have nothing to do about it. And we cannot hold them to account to it. We cannot get them to, even if when we've identified some slices of the budget, we cannot get them to allocate budget to it. So I can go on and on and on, but I'll stop here.
Thank you, Mavic. Asha.
I think when we started talking about the People's Action Plan, at least I started with countries like mine, which didn't have a national action plan and would not also maybe have a national action plan for a long, long time. So there was a need to change, to create a civil society momentum which would force the government to say that, okay, a national action plan is needed. It was not going to replace the national action plan, but it would give it the momentum to start it. I did that in Bangladesh. When Bangladesh didn't have a national action plan, we discussed that with civil society. We talked about a People's Action Plan. And finally, anyway, Bangladesh has a national action plan. It's not because of what I did. It's just that there was a civil society initiative and they could go forward with the government and together they could create that. I think what we need is at the local level where we are concerned is important because 70% of the women in countries like ours belong to rural areas. So if you have 70% of women at the local level, and they are kept out of any process, then it does not make any sense. So I think the local action plan that are there and the People's Action Plan need to merge. They have to get together. Otherwise, you cannot have, having one or the other doesn't make any sense. We need to ask women at the grassroots, what is security? We did that in Kashmir. We did a lot of trans-border initiatives with Pakistan through the Pakistan-India People's Forum for Peace and Democracy to see that if we could get anything moving on the ground. What we could not do in terms of creating a national action plan, we could at least get the women together to talk about peace. And finally, I think India is now in the Security Council a member. Maybe it's time to push the government of India to create a national action plan in India. And for that, we will need the support and solidarity of the women's movement across the globe. Thank you, Tony.
And thank you, Asha. And Kozue?
Yes, thank you. Well, 1325 in the National Action Plans well, a country like Japan and Japan finally, the Japanese government finally had this National Action Plan in 2015 after, well, and I'm not going to the detail about, how that happened, and I'm, I could go on forever, very critically. And I haven't really seen a local local women's group or People's Plan for 1325, because it does because it 1325. My argument is that the relevant policies around 1325 in many places have been weak in realizing the very original intention of 1325, that is to change to change the idea about security, so that we don't security to feminist perspective, so that we will not have more conflicts, not only eliminating violence in armed conflict. So that's my criticism about 1325. However, I think it's important that we make the best use of that. And what I have been involved more recently is to create regional, not necessarily action plan, but regional forum to discuss women, peace and security in Northeast Asia, with civil society and international organizations in the region, like UN Women and others, and possibly with some government involvement. I've participated in this effort with my colleagues in South Korea, China, Mongolia, and we've been trying to reach out to DPRK as well, because Northeast Asia is like I said, we still suffer from almost like Cold War regime, is how people on the Korean Peninsula call it. That also has its roots in colonial rule by Japan of the region. And that's something that we are hoping to address in the regional cooperation of civil society, international organizations, and some part of the government, to implement the very essence of 1325, that is to prevent war by changing our mindset from militarized security to humane security, by bringing in or focusing or highlighting or based on feminist perspective.
Thank you very much, Kozue. We just have a few minutes left, but I do want to provide, again, another brief opening here for kind of a final go around of reflections, extensions, and or questions to our colleagues here, or anyone else who might be listening to this later on.
Let me speak just to one thing, and that is the need for actual understanding, knowledge, and involvement of the women on the ground wherever they are. Asha was speaking in particular of rural women. The only way citizens can hold their governments to account is through having knowledge of what the governments should be accountable for. The basic philosophy of a democratic structure is that accountability should be related to objectives that have been defined by the people. the people tell the government what they need. We know that it's upside down now. The government tells the people what the government needs, and people provide the government with what they need. I see people's action plans as learning devices, not only for the theoretical class, but for the real people. If we can find ways to engage them in determining what needs to be done, what resources there are, and what capacities they themselves have to influence the quality of their own human security, then I think ultimately we can start to get this kind of shift, because we're talking about a major paradigm shift that has to go from every level. And it also has to be not only in policies and structures, it has to be in the consciousness of the people. And I think that consciousness is brought to awakenness through some sort of intentional learning process. And as a teacher, I see that as one of the primary purposes of a people's action plan.
Thank you, Betty.
Thank you. I just wanted to reinforce many of the points that we already have said to highlight the need for activists around the world to collectively seize the global momentum that these different anniversaries present, primarily from the perspective of the Global Network of Women Peace Builders, the 25th anniversary of the Beijing Platform for Action, the 20th anniversary of Resolution 1325. But I also would like to add the 5th anniversary of Resolution 2250 on youth, peace, and security, and the fifth anniversary of the Sustainable Development Goals. They are not perfect. We have a lot of criticisms about them, but for the first time, they include peace and security in Goal 16 on peaceful and inclusive society. So our heads of states and decision makers have now realized that development and peace and security and human rights are all parts of the same equation. But I also wanted to stress the opportunities, the silver linings presented by the COVID-19 pandemic, and the awareness about police brutality and institutional racism in the United States, of course, but also in many countries. So it's a great moment to strengthen the global social movements and highlight the intersectionality of all of this. At Global Network of Women Peace Builders, we've always defined, even though we're based in New York, we're not a US organization, we're not an American organization. We're a global organization based in New York because we're advocating in the Security Council. And now we also emphasize that our global work include the United States, because the realities confronted by women in the global South are also confronted by many women in the US, especially the Black community, the First Nation communities.
Thank you, Mavic. Asha.
I agree with what both Mavic and Betty said. This is the time, what we wrote in that the last book on peace, is a time for a paradigm shift. And COVID gives us maybe an opportunity to move from militarism to human security, because we need health, we need peace, food, we need jobs, work. All these are things that women need, and everyone on the ground knows that. But how do we do it? I think what we need to work now on is the solidarity among ourselves. We need the women's solidarity. We need the movement to come forward. And we need much, much more strengthening of that movement. For some time, it is on and off. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's not. But I think we really, really need to do that. And all of us together, both in the countries that are the poorer countries or those who are in the developed countries, we need to get together. Thank you so much, Tony, and everyone.
Kozue.
Well, thank you. I echo with the analysis or sentiment that we are maybe having a momentum to for a wider audience to realize that what we have now is not the real security, because we are seeing it and now and experiencing it. However, still the military build up, construction of military base is going on and pushed in Okinawa, and people are still like every day protesting, and that had continued almost 20 years. And they're calling for very specifically to shift this budget, huge budget, and to and which has been increasing to COVID-19 responses. Whether that's going to happen in real politics, I'm not really sure. And I, Asha's very strong call for solidarity may help it, but I'm still not really sure. I'm still not really sure, and really worried, like every day. My friend, like Suzuo, it's at the site and sitting in, which she has been doing. She has done for more than 20 years. So yeah, I think more stronger solidarity, more visible solidarity is needed. We all of us have worked in solidarity for many years. I think we still need to elevate the visibility of what we have done. So I am hope. I feel hope, but I think we still there are people who need help. Yeah, more help from people like us.
Thank you, Kozue. Thank you, Kozue. Thank you, Betty. Thank you, Asha. Thank you, Mavic. I do hope that this conversation today does ignite some hope. I think your last point here is really important. Overcoming the challenges of the deep-seated patriarchalism that's part of our political, social, and economic culture is very difficult to overcome. But I do think we find hopes. I find particularly hope in the solidarity that each of us provides, in the way in which you all worked so eloquently today to articulate the feminist human security framework and the possibilities for achieving that, the paradigm shift that we need from military state security, which is not protecting people, human security. I really appreciate the connections to what COVID has revealed and the opportunities that this, and certainly it has helped us to see and make more clear the negative impacts of state security on marginalized populations who are most affected by the crisis that we're experiencing in the world today. And then I think we find the greatest hope too in the possibilities of people's action plans as tools, not just for political change, but as Betty framed them, as learning devices, where people can begin to fully understand a couple of different things. I mean, not just what their governments are doing, but we can begin to engage in that kind of critical thinking that's necessary to make the paradigm shift in how we think about security. And we need to again acknowledge that this framework that we've been talking about today is not one that we're conceiving. It's coming from the people who are most marginalized themselves. So that really brings our attention back to the need to centering this as a learning process in a way, to eliciting that so people can begin to be empowered and take action on those convictions that really matter to them. So thank you all. So we are going to be posting this video soon on the Global Campaign for Peace Education website, along with resources that I hope each of you will provide to help further articulate this vision of a feminist human security framework, and resources, hopefully, again, for how people might get involved and engage in the work for women's empowerment and peace in your respective regions, with your various and local localities. And most importantly, strategies and ideas for how people can get engaged in actually doing and working with the devising and implementing of people's action plans. So again, thank you all very much.